Hey guys, hey everybody. Today I'm going to be covering what I think might be the Bible of conspiracy books. This would be Behold a Pale Horse by the late William Cooper. And I just want to start with a quick quote and this is basically how the book begins. And I looked, and behold a pale horse. And his name that sat upon him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword and with hunger and with the beasts of the earth. That would be Revelations 6:8. Clearly, Bill Cooper liked to keep things subtle in his wording. But he's basically talking about the apocalypse and his view of the world as it was coming under the control of what he saw of the bad guys, basically. And I'll get into who they are in a second. But he basically saw it as the apocalypse, which is what that quote refers to. So this book actually came out in 1991. The weird thing is that if you look in Amazon, you can see that a bunch of people who reviewed it gave it kind of bad reviews, and a lot of them are saying that a bunch has been removed from what was the original version of the book. That's kind of fishy. And I don't know if that's true, but I can definitely attest that I first listened to the audiobook and it was pretty short and didn't 100% make total sense. And then after I read that on Amazon, there were some people who suggested to go get the PDF of the book. And so you can find the PDF online. And so I did that. And I mean, I would say, I don't know, 75% of the book is not in his audio version. And a lot of the book is literally, he just published documents. And so I can understand why that wouldn't be amenable to good audiobook recording. But the beginning of the book, a lot of it, he's just describing his background, his life, and that's not in the audiobook. And I don't see any reason why that would have been excluded. So that was just a little bit odd. I mean, it said it was the unabridged version. It was the unabridged version of the book. So that was strange. I don't know what to think of it, but I take note. I take note of this. But before I get into the meat of the book, I do want to kind of touch on what a psyop is. Again, this is a conspiracy theorists podcast. So, and for this episode, in general, I'm not going to be totally conspiracy oriented, although I love a good conspiracy. But there's other podcasts devoted to that I think are probably doing a more in-depth job. You just have to really go down a rabbit hole to get into the stuff, and so I'm too lazy for that. But I do want to talk about what a psyop is. And this has been very evident in my world. I've been seeing this all over the place. And there's a lot of stuff that I can't say out loud just because it's hard not to get into controversy. And I'm not a controversial person. I mean, one thing I will promise to all of you is that no matter what, I will never stand up for what I believe in. Just kidding. But I'm not a controversial person. I try not to get into anything publicly. But let's talk about what a psyop is. And if you Google it, a psyop, they say it's essentially propaganda. So if some country is invading another country, they'll distribute flyers talking about how great they are while they're blowing up your family. That was dark. That was a dark joke. Or that's what they describe as a psyop. But I kind of think of it a little bit differently. I think there's a more, what I would say, insidious definition of a psyop. And that is when you have a bit of information that is true, but you don't want the public to know about it. And so you basically get an emissary, a person who is on your side. You're the bad guy, basically. And this person is on your side. They're one of the bad guys. And what the person will do is that they will go and spewing out this information, this little piece of data that is true, but they will also spew out a piece of information that's totally false and very easily debunked. And once they do that, all you have to do is debunk the easily debunkable piece of information, and the true piece of information gets buried with it. And this has happened quite a lot. Okay, so, and that's just the concept of what a psyop is. And I have heard some people say that literally the book, Behold a Pale Horse, is a psyop. So which would suggest that William Cooper was a part of it. And it's hard to say one way or the other. One of the things that he said in the book, and this is an idea that in 1991 would definitely have been considered batshit crazy, and I would have considered it crazy for quite a while, maybe up until a couple of years ago, literally. But he does point out that he says he knows that the Kennedy assassination was an inside job. And that's a crazy thing to say, and I would have definitely thought he was nuts at the time. However, it's very odd that I think it was just last year when some documents could have been made public, documents that were around the investigation around the Kennedy assassination. And they could have been made public. And once again, the president decided against, and I say once again because there have been multiple presidents to make this decision to not make them public, which is very fishy. I mean, if you didn't think it was potentially an inside job, or if you didn't think there was something squirrely going on with that, then now you do, because why wouldn't they just release this information? It's concerning, I would say. But at the time when he published this book in 1991, that was a batshit crazy thing to say. And he was also talking about the reality of UFOs. I'm going to actually just get into that. But you've heard me say in other podcasts that UFOs, the existence of UFOs, has essentially been admitted by documents coming from the Pentagon. This is a fact. This was reported on mainstream news all the way from CNN to Fox. So, I mean, it's true, even though it sounds completely insane. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about William Cooper. And he gives a lot of background about himself and his family in the book. So Cooper was an airman at Sheppard Air Force Base. And he claims that he had secret security clearance. And he had friends with him at the time who he claims they told him that they saw flying saucers all the time. But he said that they were always drunk. And so he kind of took what they were saying with a grain of salt. By the way, I know somebody who is in the Air Force. I know one person, and I did ask him one time, did you ever see anything crazy? And he said no. Again, I take these things with a grain of salt as well. But he says that in the book, he says that in 1965, he was honorably discharged from the Air Force. And at that point, he decided to join the Navy and work in the submarines for a while, which is kind of cool. And he said that he was in a submarine and he was looking out, and I don't know, one of the little spy holes. I don't really know how you look out of a submarine. I think through a spy hole, a periscope. He was looking out through that, and he claims that he saw basically a saucer start from under the water, go from under the water, and then emerge above the water and just fly off. And when he saw that, he looked around his buddies to see if anybody had noticed, but nobody was looking in the direction at that time. And so, but then, I mean, so if you're thinking, oh, well, he just made it up because he's the only one who saw it. Haha, got you. That's not true, because then he said, hey, guys, if you wouldn't mind, maybe take a look in this direction for a second. And that was when the saucer flew back down and went back underwater, and they were able to see it. Multiple people saw it. They even got pictures. But then the people, I don't know, the captain, I don't know who the leader is on a submarine. Whoever that person is said, hey, don't talk about this. And then they finally docked at Pearl Harbor. And Cooper said that he and his buddies, who had all seen the UFO, then went to go talk to the commander in private. And they each talked to him in private. And it was there at this meeting that Cooper was told that if he breathed a word of this to anyone, he could go to jail for 10 years. And he also had to like sign papers saying that he wouldn't talk about it to anyone. So that's pretty serious. I would not tell anybody. If I wouldn't have even written this book, they'd make me sign something and then tell me I will go to jail for 10 years. I'm pretty much going to do what they tell me. Again, I told you, I will not stand up for what I believe in. I'm a serious wuss. But anyway, he said that later he received even more upgraded security clearance, maybe because he kept the secret, I don't know. But one morning he said that and this is so weird, and this is a part of the book that I would say is pretty poorly written, which is that's a red flag against Bill Cooper or whoever wrote this book or whoever edited the book after Bill Cooper died, who knows. Just spitballing here. But he said that one morning he sat in this intelligence briefing and he found out something that blew his mind to such a degree that's when he was like, that's it. The next, every part of my life I'm devoting to researching this, basically what would ultimately be this book, so that he could get this information out to the public, because that was what he felt that was his sort of mission. But again, this is the part of the book where he kind of says a few things and it's unclear. Well, was this said in the briefing, or did you get this information elsewhere? This is where he says that he was informed that the Kennedy assassination was an internal job. So it's a little bit weird. I'm not going to lie. But by the way, I know in the last episode I was talking about spirits and channeling, and I talked about this girl. Her name is Ambrosia. They call her Ambi, from the Inner Bloom podcast. And she'll do interviews with dead people. And she did an interview with Kennedy. I don't know if I said this in the last episode. I don't think I did. She did an interview one time with John F. Kennedy. And I was listening to this last summer. And in this interview, she said that he told her that essentially the government wanted to okay, I think something like GMO crops or something for public consumption. But Kennedy was not into that. He was kind of standing in their way. And he claims that dead Kennedy claims that that's why he was assassinated, and it was an internal job. I'm not going to bet money that that's true, but it's just something to know, to keep in mind. I've heard so many spiritual people talk about the real reason Kennedy was, and they're all different. So it's kind of hard to really know what's true. I pay attention to them all because I have no life. So at first, Cooper claims that he got this information, all of this information, and he immediately shared it with a reporter. But then after that, he was driving a car at some point, and apparently two dudes chased him and basically ran him off of a cliff. And he was at the bottom of the cliff or whatever, and he was bloodied out of his car. And he heard the two guys say, hey, is he dead? And one of them was like, he will be. Don't worry about it. Let's go. And so he wasn't dead, and he was able to crawl out and survive. But then when they found out that he had survived, they came after him again. And I think they tried to run him off a cliff again. They didn't even it's like, can't you shoot him in the head? Like, really? How hard is it to kill somebody? But this time they ran him off a cliff, and he says that he lost his leg in that accident. And they said to him, hey, do we need to worry about you squealing anymore? And he said, no. And again, I'm like, really? What kind of hired assassins are you? You just took his word for that? But after that, he realized, okay, I got to be kind of sneaky about getting this information out to the public. And so he became very sneaky. And he starts to describe all of this strategy that he had to use to get information and then share information with different people. But meanwhile, while keeping the hounds at bay, like he didn't want any of these goons to come after him and run him off another cliff. So this is the part where it becomes clear why some conspiracy theorists, if not all, sometimes come across as a little bit nuts, because he's literally sending some information that's totally crackpotish, so that anybody who intercepts it, the feds or whoever is on the bad guy's side, anybody who intercepts it will not think that he's onto anything, and therefore they'll leave him alone. And so then he can go about, getting the real information. And when you start to talk about lies that are hidden within truths that are then wrapped up in fabrications, I mean, it just gets so convoluted, and it sounds insane at this to wit. But at the same time, I also can see how some of this is necessary. I can also see how the bad guys they're well financed and they're well organized. And so it makes sense that they actually are able to plant fake information in a way that really does a great job at hiding all of the terrible truths that they want to hide. By the way, I think nobody listened to the crop circle episode, so I'm just going to repeat one part of it, which is the story of Doug and Dave. Just one sentence. Doug and Dave invented that they were basically hacking the crop circles. They were doing all of the crop circles, hoaxing. They were the hoaxers of the crop circles. And they, went public and made a big deal out of Doug and Dave. Oh, this is what the crop circles were. Don't pay any attention to this now. And it worked. Like, they had these two dudes who could not have possibly been doing all of those crop circles. There's just it's physically impossible for them to create these things overnight without either of their wives ever figuring it out. But it didn't matter, because they were saying it suddenly, and the new media went nuts with it. Suddenly that explained away the crop circle thing, and nobody was paying attention to it. Okay, but I digress. So at this part of the book, that was the beginning material of the book. And then he goes into sort of some of the documents that he found, that he uncovered, that he's sharing, the documents from the bad guys. And I'll get into that in just a second. But I do want to share what happened to Bill Cooper 10 years after he published this book. And of course, if you Google, obviously, if you Wikipedia Google Bill Cooper, you're just going to find that he was this crazy lunatic who was like trying to organize militias, dangerous militias, to overthrow the government or something like that. That's what you're going to find about him. And you'll immediately dismiss him because he just sounds like a crazy person. But there's other stories that are written online as well. I recommend using DuckDuckGo to find those, that tell a very different story about who he was. So which to believe, I don't know. It's all very confusing. But here's what I do want to say, the Wikipedia version of Cooper first, because I find it very interesting. So in the Wikipedia story, it says that in the 90s, Cooper believed that he was being targeted by Bill Clinton and the IRS. And then in 1998, he was charged with tax evasion. So I guess he was being targeted by the IRS. And the claim that Wikipedia wrote was that he evaded arrest. And then, how do you do that? How do you evade arrest? Like, I think he was just living in a house in Arizona. So I don't understand that. Like, don't the cops just come and knock on your door and arrest you? I don't really know. That seemed strange to me. But it says that that's what he did. He evaded arrest. And so a warrant was put out for him in 2000. Okay, 2000. Then in November of 2001, there was a shootout at his house. And the claim is that one of the officers was shot by him. And of course, he, in return, was shot to death because he shot one of the officers. But okay, and there's so much about this that doesn't make sense as well. Like, why in the world would they wait for a year if he had a warrant out for his arrest? Why did it take that long for them to go to his house? I don't understand that. And B, I don't think I said A, but this is part B. When they showed up at his house with an arrest warrant, it had nothing to do with tax evasion or the arrest warrant. Instead, the reason that they said that they were at his house was because of, like, disputes that he'd had with his neighbors and an alleged aggravated assault that he had with his neighbors. So that's fishy. Like, why? No part about that makes total sense to me. And I've linked to another story, a YouTube story that I found where some guy who knew Bill Cooper is reviewing the facts of what happened that day based on the police report. And again, this guy is more on Bill Cooper's side, and he kind of makes it sound like it was a very fishy incident. Okay, so one side detail as well that I found online on a couple different sites. Again, I can't say whether or not this is true, but it's worth some thought. Bill Cooper supposedly predicted in June of 2001. All right, I'm sorry if this is controversial, y'all. I'm just saying this is just interesting, okay? Food for thought. Don't cancel me. He predicted that there would be attacks on the World Trade Center and that Osama bin Laden would be blamed for it. And so it is interesting that he was shot to death in November of 2001, 2 months after September the 11th. It's interesting. Now, anybody could have written after he was shot that, oh, he predicted, anybody could have written after September 11th. Oh, this person predicted that. Okay. So the YouTube video that I have online, I've got a little clip of it and I'm going to play it right now. And this is so fishy. Okay. This is just a quick 10-second news report from that YouTube video. Hopefully the sound is not totally terrible.
So sheriff's deputies apparently disguised themselves as a bunch of rowdy teenagers in the back of a pickup truck in hopes of luring Cooper out.
Not sure if you heard that, but basically that was a news report about the Bill Cooper shooting. And he just said that sheriff's deputies dressed up like they were rowdy teenagers and just started making a bunch of noise outside of Bill Cooper's house to get it to lure him out. What part? Please, anybody out there who's listening who knows somebody in law enforcement who is law enforcement, explain to me that tactic. Is that often necessary? It doesn't make any sense to me. That's again another part of the fishiness of this story. Again, I would think that you could just knock on his door and say you're under arrest or find him when he leaves his house. I don't know. Okay, but let's get to some of the real conspiracy shit from the book, okay? So at the very beginning, Cooper introduces this document and he says the document was found in 1986 in an IBM copier, which had been purchased at a surplus sale. Okay, maybe. Again, no part of this book is not a little bit odd, okay? And the document itself was dated 1979, and it was titled Top Secret. So try hacking past that top-notch security phrasing. And then it says the title, Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, comma, and Introductory Programming Manual Operations Research. So it starts out good, and then it gets really, really boring. And honestly, sometimes I think the strategy for these evil guys that are taking over the world is to just bore the shit out of us so that we don't even care anymore. We're like, okay, fine, we'll sign whatever document, just stop talking. Bill Cooper believed that this document was essentially a policy which had been adopted by the Bilderberg Group. And the Bilderberg Group is this group. I think they're actually a real group. Now, whether or not what they're up to is up for speculation. A lot of conspiracy theorists think that they are ruling the world and also enacting many nefarious operations with all of that power that they have. But they definitely are a group. So who knows what they're doing? They're a group of CEOs, billionaires, people who are in seriously powerful positions. And Cooper, He basically renames the document. He likes to keep his phrasing subtle. He says, "The Illuminati's declaration of war upon the people of America," is what he called it. So nothing insightful there. So the document begins by explaining to the reader that he or she has been selected to be in the know about the objectives of this, which are being put forth in this document, because he or she is, and I paraphrase, a sociopath. But in the words of the people who created this document, they say, "You have been qualified for this project because of your ability to look at human society with cold objectivity. Congratulations to you." So there might be many interpretations of this document. Again, it's all written like with legalese. It's a protocol. It's so boring until you get to the part where your life has been destroyed because of these people. And of course, I would suggest that there are many interpretations of this paper. So take my summary with a slight grain of salt. And you can find it online. There's PDFs of this book online, so you can find it and take a look at it for yourself. But from what I can gather, in the early 1950s, again, this is my summary, the wealthy elites, the rulers of the world, essentially, were doing some assessment of where we stood. Society in general stood from a economics perspective, I guess. And what they realized was that we were approaching this era in which essentially there would be an abundance for all. Basically, what they were seeing was that there was an increase in output of goods and resources combined with decreased energy expenditure requirements. So more things for less money, basically. Less effort to get more things. And so they saw this as, nobody being in poverty, and everyone would have all kinds of opportunities. And the elites viewed this potential as a loss of their own power and specialness, basically. And they also basically say in the document, they didn't really believe that all of these normal people deserve to have that kind of special life. So they couldn't stand for this. This is literally what it's saying. I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of what it says. So that it was at that point that they decided to take control and start introducing tweaks into the global milieu. Introducing tweaks into our lives, basically. And I'll describe what those are so that it'll make a little bit more sense. So here's where the document describes some of the strategies which would help the elites to manipulate and control us. One of the biggest is obviously our monetary system. And in the document, it contains a quote from Mayer Amschel Rothschild. And this man died in 1812, but he had a lot of money. And his quote is, "Give me control over a nation's currency, and I care not who makes its laws." How did he implement this control? And he implemented it by providing more loans than he had backing for. So people would give him greater wealth than he had originally in exchange for this promise of future wealth. So as long as Rothschild could continue to provide the appearance of having the collateral, people would continue to flood him with money. And this is what he used to gain power. So that's just a little bit about Rothschild and how he controlled money. But let's go back to the tweaks that the elites, whatever this unseen elite society is supposedly implementing or suggesting to implement with this protocol. And of course, whether or not you believe that they're doing this, one thing that is certain is that all of these tweaks that are suggested in this document do exist in our society. So whether or not they're being implemented by evil overlords or whether or not they're just happening naturally, that's up for question. But they do exist. Like, you can't, I see it. So, I mean, hopefully a lot of you do as well whenever I actually finally get to what the hell they are. And of course, some of the examples I can't even talk about because they're too triggering. I think people would be really pissed at me if I said some of the stuff that they are suggesting and I said this is actually happening. So I'm not even going to say some things. All right, let's get to it. Let's get to an example. One of the strategies that they say they use to control the masses is, and I quote, keep the public busy, busy, busy with no time to think. Okay, now that sounds like a very broad objective and somewhat non-specific, so it's kind of easy to dismiss. But the reason I bring it up is because isn't it a little bit odd that even though technology that we have is improved exponentially over the years to the point where with a click of a button in Excel, I can get so much work done that once upon a time would have taken maybe a day that I can do in a second. And that's just MS Excel. And then, of course, using Word and all of the things, all of the tools that we have that make our lives so much more efficient. And yet we are still slogging away at our jobs. We are always busy. That's odd. That doesn't make sense. Like, how have we don't we have a lot more time on our hands? And yet we seem to not. And I used to think that this was just because of government and corporate bureaucratic bloat that was there just as a result of people being stupid. Like, people love to have rules and regulations that probably make them feel good, but also add more time than really is necessary, in my opinion. But now I'm kind of wondering, they say this is an objective. So I think, is it possible that there literally is some evil overlord, some group of people who are literally doing this, implementing steps in our lives, rules, regulations that just keep us busy, that aren't really necessary, and they do it on purpose just to make sure that we don't get to sit down and think and live our lives? I don't know. That's a little crazy, but I did want to point that out. So another one of the examples that they point out, or that they suggest to keep the population controlled, is to control the media. And I hope that people notice that the media is being very tightly controlled. Well, again, I don't know. Does that sound like to me, that sounds like the least controversial thing I could say. But now I'm saying it out loud. I'm like, maybe some people out there don't think that's true. Not really sure. I think it's somewhat controlled. Here's an example of why I think that. So I have a friend who pointed this out to me. And I think the timing works out. So remember when Jeffrey Epstein died mysteriously in prison? And meanwhile, at the same time, I believe that Prince Andrew was being implicated in, I don't know if it was the same time as when Epstein died, but at some point Prince Andrew was implicated in some of this funny business that was going on. And interestingly, it seemed like at the same time, suddenly everybody was only talking about the fact that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were leaving the crown and moving to Canada. I think those two things happened at the same time. And the media ate it up and just suddenly ignored the story about a prince literally potentially being involved in something quite nefarious in order to talk about, who cares? Prince Harry, who, I don't know. I mean, I care because I want everybody to live their best life, but it didn't matter. Like, who cares if he's going to go to Canada? Like, a lot of people cared though. But I think sometimes the reason we care is because we're told to care by the media. Anyway, and that kind of turned our focus away from the Prince Andrew story. And maybe that was some media control by elites. Who knows? Maybe it was perfectly orchestrated on purpose. Who knows? Okay, so I have a better example of what I think is very obvious control of the media. And this one is controversial. So I'm going to try not to say I'm not putting my foot. I'm not trying to say that I stand firmly on one side or the other of this argument. Okay, I'm just gonna say what happened that day. Okay, and I'm gonna try to hide the story at first. I'll tell you what the story is, so don't worry. I'm gonna say what it's about. And now that I've said this, you're gonna be like, "What is this about?" It's not that interesting. In fact, I think this is already kind of out in the open. But here's what happened on Tuesday, April the 27th, 2021, there was a journalist who went on to the Joe Rogan podcast. And this journalist released a bombshell of a story. At the time, it was a bombshell. He released a lot of information as well, but that I would say that bombshell of a story implicating a very famous person in some nefarious doings. That's what happened that day. The same day, April 27th, later on, like maybe a few hours after the release of this podcast, the media ran with this story that had nothing to do with the bombshell. It was a totally separate story designed to basically attack Joe Rogan, his credibility, and attack his character. That was the entire purpose of this story. And the story was all based on something that Joe Rogan had said 5 days earlier. Okay? So for some strange reason, the media, Joe Rogan said this controversial thing, not related to the bombshell. He said this controversial thing. And then 5 days later, all major media outlets released this story about this controversial thing that he had said. Now, why did they wait 5 days? It's interesting that they happened to all wait 5 days until that other story was released, until the bombshell was released. To me, it seemed very coordinated and orchestrated by the media to discredit Joe Rogan so that people wouldn't pay attention to the bombshell that his guest was reporting on that day. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. Okay. So basically what I'm saying is that it really, really seemed as though the media planned to run an attack on Joe Rogan the exact same day that he aired this bombshell. And it all seemed quite coordinated, which kind of makes it seem like there's some central authority that is controlling the media, which kind of makes sense. Well, it doesn't make sense. But if you think about it, if there is a central authority controlling how the news is disseminated, that could very quickly lead to a lot of corruption. All right, so what were these stories about? What was the bombshell? What was the attack that the media ran on Joe Rogan to offset the bombshell? This is very controversial. I'm just simply saying what it was. I'm not saying what I think. But the bombshell this was the journalist that was on the Joe Rogan podcast. His name was Josh Rogan. And Josh Rogan reported that he basically reported the lab leak theory. That it was, basically that. And he said a few things about Anthony Fauci that didn't sound great. So it was a very controversial episode, to say the least. And it was very interesting. And the attack that the counterattack that the media ran against Joe Rogan on the same day, within hours of that being aired, was from an episode 5 days earlier. And this was with another comedian named Dave Smith. And during this episode, Joe Rogan made some comment about how he said, if a kid came up to me and was like, should I get the vaccine? I would be like, if you're healthy, if you just eat well, and you probably don't need it. That's what Joe Rogan said. And he wasn't saying people should take my advice, and he wasn't I mean, it was considered a very controversial thing for him to say, but if you listen to the episode, you wouldn't be like, oh my gosh. But the way the media spins it, it made it sound like he was giving medical advice. He was just talking out of his ass, which is what he always does. And he says that himself. He's like, I'm a comedian. Don't take me seriously. So anyway, that was what it was. That was just the most stark example in my experience of the media sort of seeming to be controlled by some central authority. And it seemed very fishy. Hopefully I'm not like sticking my foot in my mouth with the 5 people who listen to my podcast. So just to recap this document, according to the document that Bill Cooper put into his book, and this has been around since the early 50s. There's been a bunch of sociopathic elites who have been controlling the population using various tactics, including media manipulation. They've tinkered with our education system. Third one, keeping us busy at work. And then the third one. And then number 4 is entertaining us with garbage. To feed them entertainment that's like a 12-year-old level. And there's definitely examples of that, but there's also examples of much higher brow entertainment, like The Witcher on Netflix, starring Henry Cavill. And I'm very much summarizing what this document is saying. But if you look at all 4 of these elements, media, education, work, and entertainment, it kind of seems like they could be doing that. They could be tinkering with these things to keep us controlled sheep. But then, okay, so after that, Cooper has a bunch of other sections of the book that some of them focus on other sort of uncovered documents that he found that he's putting into print. And then the next section of the book is just discussing secret societies, which I think we all are pretty interested in. But it's giving just a glossary of it. Again, not a glossary, but these 2 people started this society, and then this society was started, and then this society. And it's not very interesting for podcasting. What I really want is, what did this society do? That's the interesting part. And what's the evidence that they did it? That would be very interesting to me. But he also has details in the book that are they're false, and they're easily identifiable as false. So, for example, at one point, he's talking about Adam Weishaupt, Weishaupt. I don't know how to pronounce that. But this dude apparently was the guy who started the Illuminati. And he says that this Adam Weishaupt wrote The Wealth of Nations, which is kind of a book about extolling the virtues of capitalism. Well, that's not true. And it's really obviously not true. I would think a lot of people know that Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. And not only that, but Adam Smith wrote it almost 100 years before Weishaupt was even born. So why did he put that in the book? It's just really interesting. Like, why did he think that? Why is it's just a strange detail that's so obviously not true? And it's again this thing that makes me wonder about whether or not this book is sort of a psyop. It has a bunch of details that seem like maybe they're true, mixed in with stuff that's definitely false. Who knows? But I'm not going to go into the rest of those really long detailed, I'm not going to go into the secret societies. And he had other sections of the book that were it's just, reading a protocol and SOP can be very boring. Even the section that I just talked about, if you read it, it's not thrilling at all. Maybe because I'm used to being entertained like a 12-year-old. It would be interesting to maybe have an interview someday with somebody who's really done a deep dive on this book and all of the details that he lays out. I would do that. And I feel sorry for whoever that person is, because they have spent a lot of time just slogging through a lot of really not interesting stuff. But overall, it's kind of crazy what he's suggesting here. And just the idea that there might be a group like maybe the Bilderbergs, some sort of Illuminati type organization that literally is consciously and purposely endeavoring to control everybody, and keep everyone dumbed down, keep them busy so that they don't rise up against them, so that they don't awaken. It's just a crazy thought to think that there might be people that might actually be true. But even if it is true, I do want to say, just to end things on a high note, no one can ever control you. That is a universal spiritual factor. Not to get all like religious-y, but only God is always on your side, and God is all powerful. Sorry, that sounds really cheesy, but it's true. It's just fucking true. God is just fucking powerful, okay, guys? All right. That is it for today's episode. Next time, we're going soft. We're not going to... sound really dirty. Next time, we're not going to go anywhere near the realm of controversy. I think I'm going to talk about Emanuel Swedenborg, all right? It sounds so boring just saying the name. Everybody just went to sleep. But this guy, literally, he started out as like a scientist. He was I think he was a mathematician. He knew all of the sciences, and as much as there was to know back in the Middle Ages when he lived. He knew all of that stuff, and then something sparked an interest in him in his later years, the latter part of his life, that made him just sort of want to explore spirituality more. And that's all he focused on. And he ended up having pretty unbelievable experiences.